Debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at PTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at, of course, the very important developments that have been taking place in the country, particularly, of course, with regards to the economic challenges that the country faces, and amid the number of protests that we've seen spread across the country with regards to the increase in electricity prices, with reports of people also, unfortunately, setting themselves on fire. And this is important, especially in terms of the kind of dire situation that exists and the desperation that the people unfortunately have been suffering with for quite some time now. And this is important also in terms of whether or not there is a possibility of the government to be able to provide relief amid, of course, the conditions with the IMF in place as well, and the standby arrangement with Pakistan. Again, something which is of utmost need of the country, but again, a tough decision that was made earlier as well, and also calls for tough times ahead. But given the situation at the moment, we've been seeing efforts coming in from the caretaker setup, starting from an emergency meeting over the weekend, and then, of course, proceeding to eventual meetings again and again with reference to this discussion. And these subsequent meetings have talked about different measures that can possibly be provided given the kind of conditions we already have in place with the IMF, and, of course, require their approval before it can be processed further. In the meeting, of course, with the IMF, we saw that the global lender has sought time in order to review the kind of proposals that have been put forward, particularly distributing the electricity bills of the month of August over the period of 6 months, and with reference to how exactly that is going to be able to then managed in terms of its impact on circular debt, the overall economy, and, of course, the obligations in place with the IMF is a discussion that, of course, is still going on and will be reviewed over by the IMF. The government is confident that it's not going to have much of an impact on that, and the country will be able to meet its financial obligations regardless. And so we're also going to be then discussing whether or not this will in fact help the people who are actually in need of such measures at the moment, given the fact that eventually also in the time period where they will have to pay the bills, they will, of course, will have to deal with not just the amount that is due in those months, but also the additional amounts of the month of August. So we're going to see whether this is going to help, especially in the short term, and that while that is helping, what sort of measures are going to be put in place for us to be able to move towards a trajectory that is looking positive, that is moving in the right direction for the people. We've also, of course, seen that there are tough conditions with reference to the rupee against the dollar as well, and the kind of inflation that we're seeing in the country. And so the way that this crisis is developing, of course, is pointing towards other issues that may also be impacted, such as, of course, food security concerns within the country. And so we're going to talk about all of this and how different financial obligations are interconnected, as was also said by the interim finance minister in the Standing Committee on Finance and Revenue, where she was asked a number of questions with regards to the current economic conditions and challenges. And she even also talked about how the way that we are moving forward is something extremely difficult, and it seemed that previously no stone was unturned in terms of putting the economy on such a destructive track, and so this is going to take a lot of difficult measures and time for the government to be able to move forward. She also talks about how there seems to be no financial capacity in terms of being able to provide subsidies to the people, and how government will be able to navigate through not just the obligations with reference to the IMF, but, of course, other obligations as well that the country again has to manage. So we're going to be taking a look at all of this in our show today and try and understand what the situation is at the moment. Where do we stand? What is the reality of the situation? Since, of course, much unfortunately also gets lost between a lot of viewpoints and perspectives, and then, of course, spoilers in the game as well. So we're going to be taking a look at that and try and understand where we stand today, and then moving forward, what options exist and what we need to do and what we can eventually hope for. Our next segment is going to take a look at the foreign relations and the specific relationship between India and China, something that we've discussed previously as well, since we saw the leaders of the two countries also have a brief conversation on the sidelines of the BRICS summit, which was said by the Chinese side that was candid and in-depth and spoke about a range of issues. But we've seen now that apparently there has been another point of friction between the two countries, where India has also launched a protest against what is being called a standard map that has been issued with reference to a newspaper who talks about how China has also brought in the Arunachal Pradesh and Aksai Chin and claimed that as part of China, something of course that India is contesting and claiming as their own as well. So the kind of border claims that have been made within this map is something that India has strongly rejected and denied, and has said that this is in no way something that is evident of the fact that the territory indeed belongs to China. So we're going to be taking a look at what this means, especially in light of what we earlier saw as a thawing of relationship between the two countries, and whether or not this then can potentially end any hope for a conversation between the two leaders moving forward in the future as well. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analysts Farrukh, Pitafi and Faisal. We've also been joined online for our first segment with reference to the economic challenges that the country faces by Mr. Khalid, Mustafa, who's a senior journalist, and engineer Nazir, program manager and head SDPI, Center for Private Sector Engagement. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being a part of the discussion today. Let me start with you, Mr. Nazir. The situation, as we view it, of course, is extremely difficult and challenging. And that's not news in terms of what we have been looking at since the past year or so, even previously, and then especially in the way that we've been negotiating with the IMF and the kind of conditions we knew were in place under this standby arrangement. But I want to understand, given the fact that now we've seen for a number of days the kind of protests by the people and the kind of difficulties that the people are facing, even though this was something that, of course, was there already in place, the government seems to be trying for relief and trying to find a way forward with the IMF that can actually work through. What do you think really is the situation at the moment? And then with reference to our discussion with the IMF, we'll talk about what the IMF thinks about the proposal, but with reference to what the IMF is looking at in terms of Pakistan as a whole and its commitments as a whole, how does us also moving forward with a different proposal before the first quarterly review look like?
Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So I'll answer this in two ways actually. Number one is that we have been looking at it in the short-term relief process for the last many years now, and that has led to this actually the subsidization mindset has led to us giving this short-term relief to the public, and that has always have had a rebound effect. So our electricity price or even the energy pricing is dependent on three major factors, amongst others, of course, but these are the major factors. Number one is the rupee devaluation, and this has been also characterized by Dr. Shamshad Akhtar as something that the government prioritized in this regard. But we also have to look around at the international relations level. For example, the drone attack by Ukraine on Russia might again have an effect in the coming days on the supply chain. So that eventually will affect the oil prices as well as the delivery of petroleum products to Pakistan, and the small subsidy, the short-term subsidy that we are targeting at the moment might not actually convert into a relief for the public, unfortunately. So this is a very, very difficult time for any government.
Right, and Azab, I understand what you're saying, but also help me clarify the situation. So does this mean that given whatever factors, of course, there are the kind of factors that you're pointing out in terms of foreign relations or the macroeconomic factors that are impacting the situation, but I want to know that, of course, all of this is also part of the plan, part of the negotiations and the discussions that we've had with the IMF for so long. Then I want to know that given what the people are going through right now and the kind of obligations that we have with the IMF, do you think that this is absolutely something that we should not even consider in terms of speaking with the IMF, that this proposal or any short-term measure relief should not be provided?
I think it is required at the moment, yes. But I think this should be, in parallel, this should be coupled with a very structural reform package that should be actually coming from the IMF, because we always tend to take serious things serious when it is coming from the donor, and IMF has done some wonderful structural reform work in several of the countries. So I think this is the type of international exposure that we need, and I think it comes at a very opportune time when our finance minister is a reform champion. She is not only known in the national circle, but also in the international circle. She has been at the top level in the United Nations, and I
Right,
think this is a very
but
opportune
Azad,
time that
correct me if I'm wrong, but haven't we already decided on a reform plan with the IMF?
yes, we have, but that is again a short-term one. I think we need a more structural reform package. We need to fix this issues of the demand management. More than 50% of the demand is coming from the domestic sector, which is basically a non-productive sector. So eventually, we have developed that electric power as a consumption-based economy, and we need to shift it to the production based economy. For example, if the 9 special economic zones that were part of the initial CPEC plan, if they had actually been implemented in the way they were planned, maybe we will not be going through this crisis, because we will have a much deep productive part of the economy than that dependent on this electric power generation sector that we have. So at the moment, the main issue is that we have a very stringent demand ratio between
All right.
summertime and the winter time. So in the winter time, our demand almost
All right,
gets
Farrukh,
halved.
let me come to
So
you with a number, because of course you're also our in-house economist, as well as many other things, including a political analyst and legal expert, and of course the rest. But I want to know, in terms of what is going on, the way that the IMF looks at us giving a new proposal at this point in time. B, the proposal itself. Do you think that it helps the people? It does not impact the circular debt or the economy to a level where we are bringing in tougher times within the country? And three, whether or not you think that the kind of trust deficit that we had in the past with the IMF, or the obligations that we need to meet beyond the IMF, will also be impacted with the way that we're handling the situation at the moment.
Right, Sana, thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'm nothing, I'm just a participant of the program, and I'm going to actually object to the fact that you have called one analyst energy economist, and I'm senior analyst. I wish you would have identified that I don't lack energy, so that would have been easier. But regardless of this, if you let me remind you what I was telling you the other day in this program, that there are twin locks on the circumstances of fiscal capability of the government. The first one is, of course, the standby arrangement with IMF. Because of that, we are constrained. The second one is fiscal policy that was passed before the previous government went away. Because of that, all the monies are allocated. And the bills that you passed, actually, they become laws. And it becomes, if you are going to actually, move around money, then you are breaking some rule. So unfortunately, this is the biggest problem that has been there. We have been going through this vicious cycle repeatedly. When we go to IMF, when we pass budget, our commitments are aspirational. But then suddenly, because there is a pushback from the people, and of course they are our people, they suffer. You and I are also suffering. But because there is such an hue and cry, immediately what happens is that the government immediately goes into damage control mode. And then what happens is that you, in the end up doing, something which is going to, which usually violates the international commitments or your internal fiscal commitments. So if you remember that day also, I had told you that unfortunately I have to be the harbinger of bad news, and that is the government of Pakistan does not have the kind of fiscal space to offer any kind of subsidies in this scenario. What was the counter option? I gave you two. One was staggering the bills over months, right? Especially in winters when there is limited consumption of electricity. At that time, you had very astutely pointed out that will IMF accept that? And I had said, why not? We'll have to consult them, but that can be done. So right now we are in that direction and we are approaching that. But the biggest problem then is, remember that the previous government, especially because of dynamics, actually committed to increasing the tax inflows without actually reforming the tax base. So what happens is that most of the bills or taxes are being collected through other means rather than expanding the tax base. So what exactly happens right now? That means that all these inflows that the government of Pakistan gets, for example, electricity bill, petroleum bill, other bills, through that it will have to collect those taxes, and because we have committed, it becomes important. So right now, the only, and the second option that I gave, and that was that a limited cash transfer scheme through BISP. So I haven't heard about the latter part, but the first part is being, something that the government is trying to do or implement. Now, as was pointed out earlier by our fellow guests as well, there are two things which are clear. One, that the inflation is not stopping all over the world, particularly when it comes to fuel or petroleum products and food items as well, because of particularly the war or conflict that was just mentioned, Ukraine war. Because of that, remember that both Russia and Ukraine produce a substantial portion of world's grain produce, right? Similarly, also oil contribution is humongous as well. So both of these have come under pressure, and because of that, the price keeps on increasing. And meanwhile, in Pakistan, dollars price is increasing as well. So that is going to put further pressure on prices here, because then, electricity is produced from, petroleum products. It is going to further, increase the price, and similarly, petroleum prices also rise. So that is going to be an unfortunate circumstance, and I think I don't envy the current government. But as was pointed out, our finance minister is very capable.
Right, and
our prime minister is committed
I also want to
also.
know, given the fact that this distribution exists over 6 months, do you think it will help the people? Can they afford that?
Is it easy for somebody who is earning 25,000 to pay a bill of worth 40,000 in one go, or if it is staggered over 6 months, right? So this is the answer that is there. I think that it is tantamount to softening the blow, and I think that will happen. A lot of people will be able to handle this in coming days. But of course, in winter there is something else that happens. In winters, if you are not consuming electricity, you end up consuming natural gas, and therefore its prices actually go high. So what exactly happens when you are to consume petroleum product, natural gas, and you have to pay electricity bills as well? So cumulatively it might be difficult, but when it comes to electricity bills, that might not be that difficult at all. Sana.
All right, let's also explore further in terms of how we've seen the finance minister also talk about the kind of challenges that exist. And Khalid Saab, with reference to what we have heard, we all know, of course, that these are tough times for the people. But we've also seen that now the kind of protests that we've been seeing in the traders community have also joined and agreed that these are tough times for everyone and everyone's facing hard times. But I want to know, given the way that we've seen the protests on the street and how, unfortunately, the protests also seem to be a ground where even spoilers tend to benefit and take advantage of, And then, of course, with the way that the caretaker setup has a lot of pressure given the economic challenges and the conditions of the IMF and the way they have to, of course, respond to the people and then also negotiate with the IMF. How do you see the way that the protests are also being talked about and the way that the challenges that the government is facing is also being talked about, particularly in the media, and also in the way that both sides are putting forward this issue?
Assalamu alaikum, Sana. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to speak my mind on the issues. Pakistan is faced with, uh, in my view, Pakistan's economy is under siege because of the perpetual flawed economic policies and flawed economic model, which is based on import-oriented economy, and we have to turn it into the export-oriented economy, and this is the best way because what we attain the kind of loans from our friendly countries are consumed to just finance the imports. So this is not the solution. Every government, when it comes to the power, adds the burden of public debt. In PTI, in its 308 months tenure, added 8 trillion loans, and the PDM government in 15 months added 18.5 trillion loans. So this is not the way to run the country, number one. Number two, as far as the electricity bills are concerned, why now the electricity bills are inflated to manifold? Just because of the fact the contribution of the uh, capacity charges payments have increased too much. The share of the capacity charges payments have increased to 70% in the electricity bills, in the tariff. So we need to tackle how we need to tackle the capacity payment issue. But there is a saying that when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. But our policy makers and decision makers continue to dig the hole. This is actually they we are going towards catastrophe in the sense that we have already capacity payment capacity to generate the electricity of 150,000 megawatt, and we are still working on to add more capacity in the country, which is unfair. This government is already PDM government was already planning to add one nuclear power plant known as Chashma nuclear plant 5 of 1200 megawatt, and likewise PDM government was also trying to add 600 solar power plant and 300 megawatt water power plant based on imported fuel. So the government was not worried about the capacity issue, whereas whereas the capacity whereas the capacity has become the monster for the Pakistani electricity consumers because the capacity payment has increased to 2.3 trillion, and in this financial year we have to pay 2.3 trillion uh, uh, just in the head of the capacity payments.
Right.
Overall we have to pay 3.2 trillion, but out of 3.2 trillion we have to pay 2.3 trillion in the head of the capacity payments. So most worrying aspect of the tariff is capacity payments addition. Yes.
Right, absolutely. And Khalid Sahab, I understand, and this is, of course, important in terms of understanding the situation as well and the kind of measures that need to be taken, particularly in the long term. But Faisal, given the situation at the moment, I also want to understand, we talked about how the caretaker setup, of course, is tasked with the quarterly reviews of the standby arrangement and potentially also the completion given the delay in elections. But in terms of where we stand today and the way that the government seems to be trying forward for relief measures, how seriously do you think that these negotiation efforts will be undertaken by the IMF, and what sort of a margin or space exists for the caretaker setup to be able to provide not just this immediate relief but also a longer term plan moving forward?
Of course, even IMF knows that extraordinary situations require extraordinary measures. Of course, if we talk about the intent of the government, especially the interim government, when they took office, it was not their intention to go on any other track other than which was agreed upon with the IMF previously. But of course, on ground situations are of such dire nature that the interim setup has to take the steps, and I think somehow IMF of course need to look into it through that prism, how people are suffering on ground. And to me, I think extraordinary situations will obviously attract the extraordinary measures from the IMF side. Here I would obviously agree with Khalid Saab that previous governments, of course, their focus has been on imports. They did not even put extra efforts to export something from outside. And yes, we can debate on this, that of course for a couple of years we saw coronavirus days. Obviously during that time it was sort of business, not the normal day at all. It was obviously a different situation. But now when we were back on track, we should have been obviously working on to increase the exports rather than importing more. Here another thing I want to highlight is, of course, if we talk about what are the recommendations, the only thing I can see is, of course, if we talk about the necessities are taxed, and of course necessities are the ones almost every Pakistani is being affected by them. Rather than taxing more the necessities, luxuries are to be taxed more, and we know that in the past such kind of ideas, they kept on coming up, but of course a serious work needs to be done on this. Another aspect which I want to highlight, that the focus of the government should be on taxing especially a sector which is a very rich sector in Pakistan, and that is of obviously real estate sector. Real estate sector needs to be taxed more, because we know that in real estate sector, people who are their clients, they are already the ones who can afford afford anything possible, and that is why they are living there. So taxing them and taxing the poor people less, that is how the things can work in the coming future.
And be able to take such measures. But let me also come to you, Ahad, with reference to what was earlier discussed, especially in the aftermath of these protests, was the ability to move forward with privatization of discourse as well, with also in terms of limiting line losses or power pilferage, and to also move forward in a way that is also being discussed now that can help support the distribution of power in terms of commercial loans as well. And I want to know whether all of this, in terms of where we stand today, will be added to the kind of measure that is being given in terms of the division of bills in 6 months installments, and how exactly will this, do you think, be taken with regards to the way that we're moving forward with the IMF? Do you think that this is something that will be welcome and will not impact the way that we want to move forward?
Thank you. So just to, I think, taking things forward from what Pitafi Saab said, I think this 6 month installments might not eventually impact the consumer, uh, because of the fact that, just like I mentioned, that the fuel prices are expected to go up. Uh, the market sentiment is still very uncertain, so we can expect a repeat devaluation, and all of these factors will eventually decrease the purchasing power of the consumer to a still lower level. So even the installment plan might not be able to sort of impact that of course we are trying to envisage. With regards to the privatization of discos and the other structural reforms that are here, of course these are long-term plans. This cannot be done in one go. We have already seen the privatization of the Karachi Electric Supply Company. It has been a very long process, and finally, K Electric has now started to, of course, show some promising accounts, but they still have not shown profit in even one year. So this is, I think, a very bad sort of an example for other investors coming into the power sector. I believe a much better reform process, which is of course being followed by NAPRA, and it is under implementation, is the multiple buyer model that CTBCM model that has been already pitched, and we of course have seen many of the discos being given non-inclusive licenses this time. So I think this is probably the future. But again, we need to focus on the basic economic principles, that how will we ensure that there is competition there? How will we
All right,
ensure the demand
absolutely.
management is
Let me
proper?
also come to you, Khalid Saab, once again,
And,
with reference to the
and
way that the
if I can,
situation is also being
Sana,
perceived,
if I
because
can,
I want to
I
know,
can just take
in terms of
15
how
seconds.
challenging it is.
Uh,
Previously, also there was a lot of conversation around default, around the fact that this is a turning point in Pakistan's history, that where a lot of people are still talking about the tipping point, and talking about how eventually things will be out of control. I want to know whether or not do you think that this sentiment that is being talked about is exaggerated, and is not the way that situation is or should be posed, particularly in terms of the media. And then I also want to know, given the fact that the way that the process is moving forward in terms of big shoulds and big structural reforms that Ahad Saab was also talking about, do you think that there is space for us to be able to do that in a place where, unfortunately, even the caretaker setup is being criticized for getting approval of the IMF for providing relief to the people, when in fact that is something that they must do or should be doing?
Sana, as far as the reforms are concerned in the power sector, I didn't see uh, for the last 2 decades, I didn't see any kind of impressive and result-oriented reform except increasing the tariff. Um, as far as the caretaker government is concerned, how it is responsible, it is it is unfortunate that the caretaker regime came when the situation was very worst. Uh, uh, this is the what we are experiencing in the power sector is the result of the flawed policies of the previous governments. It is not the caretaker regime.
Right.
However, caretaker regime has taken up this matter seriously, and uh, Prime Minister has held 3 consecutive days discussions and meetings, but failed to find out the meaningful way out uh, how to tackle this issue, because there is no fiscal space available with the finance ministry. Given the terms and conditions of the IMF program,
Right, but they have
uh,
come up with a proposal that, of course, is under discussion with the IMF, that is important under the SPA. That's all that we have time for, unfortunately. Khalid Saab and Ahad Saab, thank you very much for joining us and being part of the discussion. Before we move on to the next segment, Farrukh, very quickly, your comments also, especially in terms of the media.
Right, Sana, while listening to you, particularly you were talking about public distress. And I was wondering what exactly happened to all the experts in the country, because usually whenever there is some kind of distress or some outburst, people actually study that, right? There are psychologists, there are psychiatrists, there are shrinks who actually take note of that as well. But we haven't seen that kind of commentary at all. Why? Because everything is so hyperbolic. People don't actually pay attention to any kind of nuances anymore. The biggest question is, we can keep on telling ourselves that we have reached the tipping point. Perhaps we haven't learned anything from our 5,000 years of history, where we haven't seen any tipping point at all. People keep on suffering. The great thing about Pakistan and India is that the rich one always raise a hue and cry, and the poor keep on suffering and suffering and suffering all the time. But unfortunately, because our philosophers are such on television, they keep on saying that perhaps we are going to have some kind of Arab Spring, and because we have these kind of flawed notions, Sana, in the end, some poor soul actually thinks that he can be or she can be bourgeoisie, and that's why they end up killing themselves. So this is very important to understand right now, that instead of spreading ignorance, especially on the private media, the way we are seeing, we need experts to study what is going on. And similarly, when we talk about all these reforms and the counterfactuals, we can talk about that, but we'll have to focus on the immediate problems, and then realize that there might be certain things that can be done.
Right.
For example, one of our guests actually spoke about market instability, or how insecure is the market or investor. So perhaps we can actually address that and ensure that those people who are hoarding dollars might not be able to do it. But with that kind of a situation, when we actually go on a counterfactual march or fishing expedition, we end up with nothing, right? We have a very limited window of time between now and the elections. After elections, an elected government comes, and then it becomes their headache. Right now, there's a caretaker government which is trying heroically, valiantly to try to tackle all these issues. But because our support system is not there, our 50, 60 private channels are totally blind to the realities on ground and are totally driven by drivel. That is why we are in a mess that does not actually go away. One very quick nuance elsewhere as well.
All right,
while
let's
we
also
keep
talk
on,
more about
while we
what is
keep
going
on talking
now
about the
in our
previous
next segment
government,
with
there is a
reference to,
difference between
the
Shehbaz Sharif
relationship that
and
we've
Ishaq
seen
Dar.
between India and China.
Yeah,
Right, and we want to also take a look at the situation with reference to the kind of protests that we've seen coming in from India's side. And Faisal, with reference to how we've talked about the sidelines of the BRICS summit and the two leaders exchanging ideas and talks with reference to what was called candid and in-depth discussion, I want to know then that how do you see this particular development, and do you think that it's in line with how we've seen perhaps the previous 19 or so rounds of talks with the top military brass, and then of course the kind of history that exists, and especially how we haven't really seen a proper engagement between the two, or do you think that this perhaps may have been a shift since the BRICS meeting and will now cause a potential hindrance in the path forward?
Sana, since last week, obviously, since that meeting took place between President Xi and obviously Prime Minister Modi, of course, Indian media and Indian pundits, they kept on chanting about it, that yes, we are heading towards normalization of the relations, and of course, this will bring something positive out of it. This wasn't the case. I mean, they have seen a shocker today, in which, of course, they saw the map which is drawn, and rightly drawn by China. They claim 89,000 square kilometer of Arunachal Pradesh, 38,000 square kilometer in eastern Ladakh, and then Aksai Chin area as well. and it has been repeatedly obviously said by the Indian ministers as well. One of such example, I have been highlighting it time and again. It was back in 2020. I'm talking about September 2020. Rajnath Singh, he himself highlighted that China claims it. China considers it to be part of China's territory. Obviously, through this map, they have highlighted it that this belongs to them. And I don't think now India, of course, that since last we kept on saying that there are normalization, and of course it would lead to a sort of positive talks between both of the countries, and we will see a positive effect of that. I don't see that taking place, and once more China has made India cautious about it, that since India took the unilateral decision in Indian illegally occupied Kashmir of obviously abrogation of 370 and 35A, that's when China checkmated India in Eastern Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh, and to me, I think China will keep on doing that until a permanent resolve to it takes place.
Right, and with reference to what we've seen coming in from India also, we have seen that there is a discussion around the fact that a border map claiming any particular territory is no evidence of the fact that this territory is a certain country or the others. And Farrukh, I want to then understand the importance of any country actually releasing such maps, especially on territories that are disputed or claimed by more than one party. That I want to know then how valid will this point be in terms of what India and China both are talking about in this situation, and how India says it's not going to make any difference. Then what is the protest about?
Right, Sana, I think that maps like these have actually existed for quite some time. Let me remind you that India, who's actually, complaining a lot right now, Lady doth complain a lot, but they have actually in their parliament installed a map, a new parliament, which actually claims Pakistani and other countries' territories as well. So it is just an aspirational thing, nothing more. But if you remember, last week I had actually brought up an editorial, not editorial, a column by Economist, one of the best publications that are there, criticizing India's media. Now we have actually learnt about the source of all that malice as well. India's foreign minister, or minister for external affairs, for some reason he is not called external person, but he is called external minister. But that guy, keeps on spreading more venom. Yesterday, day before yesterday, that again, actually, that guy actually said very poisonous things about various neighbors of India. And that is perhaps why you keep on seeing all this instability in India's reaction. It actually takes me back to the First World War, when it was thought that Germany's king, Kaiser Wilhelm III, actually was born with a innate or by birth defect, an arm that was not correct, and because of that he could not join army, and that's why, in order to overcompensate, he actually ended up creating a war that engulfed the whole of Europe. So I think that this diminutive figure of Indian foreign policy is also trying to overcompensate by spreading hate. And because of that, you keep on seeing more reactions coming from India. Sana.
All right. Thank you very much, Faisal, and thank you very much, Farrukh, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. There is, of course, still a lot left to be talked about in terms of what is going on both within the country and then, of course, in terms of the international community. We're going to be taking a look at all of these measures, but what we can hope for the people inside the country is that the right steps are taken. And, of course, as we await what is going to be the move forward with regards to our negotiations with the IMF, what we can only hope for is that there is relief for the people who are suffering at the moment, and that we can move forward towards a better country tomorrow. That's all that we have. We'll see you now in the debate.